Let's talk about how anxiety is an illusion. This is Jürgen Rasmussen. Welcome to the Provocative Hypnosis vlog. So let me be very clear. When I talk about anxiety being an illusion, I'm not suggesting that nothing's going on. What I am suggesting is that it's not quite what you think it is. And being able to see that illusion for what it is can be extremely liberating. So, first of all, anxiety is not an emotion, it's not a feeling. There are no symptoms of anxiety. Anxiety is strictly a concept and an interpretation. And there isn't one anxiety. Let me illustrate what I mean by this. So, for example, just earlier today, I worked with a woman who said she was anxious. And when I asked her, "How do you know that you're anxious?" she said, "Well, my heart starts racing and I get sweaty palms." And I said, "Anything else?" And she said, "No, I think that's primarily it." So I then asked her, "So when you in certain contexts feel your heart racing and you feel sweaty palms, you label that as anxiety?" And she said, "Yes, I guess that's what I'm doing." Now, last week I worked with a guy who said that he was anxious around heights. He would be trying to do an escalator at the local shopping mall, and he never got to the fourth floor. And he said that he was very anxious. And I asked him, "How do you know that you're anxious?" And he said, "Well, it's those prickly sensations in the balls of the feet and the soles of the feet. And then, worst of all, my calves, my legs feel like jello." And I said, "Well, do you get a racing heart? Do you get sweaty palms?" "No, I just get the jello feeling in my calves and the prickly feelings in the balls of the feet and the soles of my feet." So I said, "Okay, so when you get the prickly sensations and the jello sensations, you label that anxiety." And he went, "Right." And then I have had other people who if you ask them, "How do you know you're anxious?" they might say, "Well, there's this tightness in the chest. There's the ear hunger. There's the sensation that I'm not quite getting enough air." So whenever they feel those sensations, they label that as anxiety. Other people might be a feeling of coolness. So they might say, I get really cold in the body and I get muscle tension. Other people might say that they primarily get really dizzy or nauseous. One guy I saw for fear of driving said that when he got anxious, he felt that he was kind of leaving his body, and he had problems distinguishing between the body and the car, and that was what he labeled anxiety. So the point being this: even though there are certain body sensations that people typically label as anxiety, you can speak to 5 different people who all say that they suffer with anxiety, and if you ask them about what they experience, you'll notice that they can have markedly different experiences, and they label them as anxiety. There's no symptoms of anxiety. So, for example, if we take the people who say, "Oh, yeah," like the person I worked with earlier today, I get a beating heart and I get sweaty palms and I get hot. That's how I know I get anxious. What I had her do is I had her run on the spot really hard for 30 seconds. Then I had her stop, close her eyes, and describe the activity of the body. And guess what? She described hot and racing and sweaty palms. And I said to her, "Sounds like exactly the same sensations." And she says, "Yes." I said, "How scared are you?" She said, "Not at all." So the point here being that people who say that the symptoms of anxiety is a racing heart and sweaty palms, they have had many experiences in their life where they had those sensations but they didn't create anxiety out of them. And the same goes with everything else I've described, whether it's contractions, rotations, hyperventilating, warmth, cold. People have had experiences of feeling the same sensations and not creating anxiety out of them. Anxiety then is an interpretation. The feelings are neutral. Now, when I say neutral, know that our brains communicate with the body all the time, and the body sends signals back. And it's impossible for us to be aware of all the stuff that's happening in the body. So it's the brain's interpretation or summary of what it thinks is going on in the body that we feel as affect. There's always some affect going on, right? And we might have sensations that are more or less pleasant. We may have sensations which are more or less intense. But then, depending upon the context, we create very different stories of what it means to experience those sensations, and then we have different emotional states. The moment you begin to realize this, so for example, one woman I worked with once said that when she was anxious, she experienced contractions, pulsations, uh, and heat waves, and some other sensation. And I just kind of smiled at her and I said, that kind of sounds like something else. And she blushed and she laughed and she was like, oh my God, you're right. Like those were some of the most pleasant experiences that she had sexually were quite similar to these sensations. So the point here being that any body sensation is neutral in the sense that there's no mandatory emotional state you have to have given those particular sensations. So there's no scary feelings. Now, in addition to felt sensations, we have thoughts. So, for example, I have clients who come in, and I had a client not that long ago who admitted to me that before we started doing our work, he had had so much issues with jealousy that he had had murder fantasies. That if he murdered his partner, perhaps he could take 10 or 15 years in prison just to get out of the torture chamber of his mind because the feelings were so overwhelming. Now, he never actually planned to do it, but it's just a testament to how much he was suffering psychologically. But the thought behind this all was, what if my partner has sex with someone else? What if she has an affair? And whenever that thought would emerge, he would essentially freak out and then interrogate his partner and check her phone and all sorts of stuff. And that would fuel the intensity of the experience. But the thought, what if my partner has sex with someone else, is neutral. Meaning, there's no mandatory emotional experience you have to have given that particular thought. So when I have clients who are not jealous, for example, just to make this point to them, from time to time I ask them, by the way, is jealousy a big issue for you? And if they say no, I'll say, do you love your wife or do you love your husband? For wives, by the way, it's more often, what if he has feelings for her? The man wants to know, did you have sex with him? So male and female jealousy is a little bit different. But anyways, I asked the person, is jealousy a big issue for you? No. Do you love your wife? Yes. Now, have you ever had the thought, what if she ends up having an affair or what if she has sex with someone else? Almost always they say yes. And when I then ask them, well, do you freak out? Do you panic? They go, no. Well, what's your technique? And they go, I don't have any. They don't have any technique. It's never occurred to them to mark out that particular thought as a threat. So there's no anxiety. It's not the thought, it's the interpretation of the thought as a threat. Or let's take health anxiety. I have other clients who, whenever the thought, what if I get cancer, shows up, the alarm goes off. They've innocently marked out that thought as if it's a threat. And they might be doing yoga, eating healthily, exercising, doing all the right things, but they're noticing that they're getting more and more anxious. Why? Because all of these activities are a way to solve the marked out thought, what if I get cancer? And the more they engage with this, the more they reinforce the alarm. The more they reinforce the notion that this thought is a threat. But the thought, what if I get cancer, is neutral. It's neutral in the sense that it has no mandatory emotional experience or train of thought to follow it. So sometimes I'll ask people who say they don't have health anxiety, have you ever had the what if I get cancer thought? Most often they say yes. When I ask them, do you freak out? They say no. If I ask them, what's your technique? Again, they kind of shrug their shoulders and go, they don't have one. Because they've never marked out that particular thought as a threat. There are no scary thoughts. There are no scary sensations. There are no symptoms of anxiety. Anxiety isn't a disease. It's not a condition. It's just an interpretation. What ends up happening with some of us is that we start interpreting quite a few of our thoughts or our sensations or even our thought processes, such as worry or rumination, as a threat, and the fire alarm goes off. If you start to get this, you'll start to see that with anxiety, the solutions are the problem. It's all the attempts to suppress the thoughts and the feelings, to distract ourselves, to breathe, to think positively, to all the magical techniques we try to do to get to the bottom of it. All of this reinforces the notion that the thought and or feeling is a threat to begin with. So that is the key thing about anxiety. It's not a chemical imbalance in the brain. This is a myth that even the pharmaceutical companies these days are kind of admitting that there was never any strong evidence or compelling evidence for. So it's not a disease, it's not a condition. Anxiety has no neural signature in the brain. It's not a distinct state. It has no chemical signature in the body, so to speak. There are no symptoms of it. It's just an interpretation. Now, here's something else. Some people think that, oh yeah, anxiety is a survival mechanism to warn you against danger. Nonsense. Complete bullshit. Anxiety does not protect you against dangers. This is a complete misunderstanding. So you can create the argument that we have certain, let's say, biological or psychologically innate tendencies to have a fear response or a fear prediction when we see certain things, like let's say a tiger or something like that. But anxiety, the process of anxietizing is usually something that occurs when nothing specific is going on. We're essentially just thinking. And we're trying to solve thoughts and feelings with more thoughts and feelings. It has nothing to do with anything. So this idea that anxiety protects you, it doesn't. What protects you is knowledge, wisdom, common sense, having a clear mind. So, for example, let's say I'm holding my 6 year old son, in the hand, and we're waiting to cross the street in traffic. Now, I know that if my son and I walk into the street, we're going to get killed by these cars. Do I have any anxiety? No. Do I need anxiety to protect me to not walk into the street? No, not at all. I'm completely calm and alert. I don't walk out into the street because I know not to do it. I don't need an anxiety response to protect me. As a matter of fact, if I were anxious, more of my bandwidth would be concerned with my own inner experience. I'd have less bandwidth left to notice what's actually going on in my environment. Or let's say, I live in Norway. Let's say I come home in the winter and my wife is making dinner and there's something hot, the stoves are hot. I don't go to the stoves and put my hands, my palms on the stoves to warm them in the cold winter, because I get third degree burns if I did that. I don't do that because I know not to do it. But I have zero anxiety as I approach the hot stove. It's not that the closer I get to the plates, the more anxiety I feel. And hadn't it been for the anxiety, I would have warmed my palms on the stove. Not at all. I have zero anxiety. I don't do it because I know not to do it. And if you look at your life, you'll have the same recognition. Even with fear and also anxieties. I remember a few years ago, I looked at this list that talked about the 10 most common causes of death and then the 10 most common anxieties. And there was virtually no overlap. The only thing that had an overlap in the top 10 in both categories was the fear of germs, bacteria, and virus, and influenza and tuberculosis being, I think it was the eighth most common cause of death in the world. That was the only thing that had an overlap. Most of the things that we claim to be scared of were not at all likely to experience. And there's a lot of stuff that perhaps we should be scared of, but we're not. So, for example, this is my 27th year of seeing clients professionally. I see people who anxietize every day. There's quite a bit of research to suggest that eating a lot of white sugar is not good for us. I have never had a single client, like not one, not a single time, come in and say, you know what, Jurgen, when I'm in the supermarket, I feel kind of calm, but then my eyes catches the Snickers bars, and I'm filled with anxiety and panic. And that anxiety and panic protects me from grabbing the Snickers bar and assaulting it. And hadn't it been for the anxiety, I would have taken all the Snickers bars. I've never seen a single client who said anything remotely similar to that either. So if you get all of this, you'll also get that the whole idea of curing anxiety or beating anxiety is a misnomer. It's a complete misnomer. And we in the kind of self-help coaching therapy, whatever you want to call it, industries, we kind of contribute to this mess because we sell powerful techniques, whether it's havening touch or EMDR or hypnotherapy or CBT or whatever. And I'm not saying that none of this is ever useful. It can have its place as a ritual if it's framed in a good way, you know. But the reality is, no thought has any inherent power. It doesn't come with a secret sauce or ingredient that makes it so that if the thought appears, you have to act on it, or it mandates a particular emotional response, or you have to have all these other ruminative thoughts. No thought has any inherent power to make you think, feel, or do anything. It's just that we attribute it to those thoughts. So we end up feeling, interpreting, believing, and living as if certain thoughts or certain sensations are incredibly powerful. As if that thought appears, then I have to act on it. Or if this thought appears, I have to get completely upset. Or if this thought appears, then I have to ruminate about it for hours. The thought itself does not have that power. If you get that, you'll simultaneously get that no psychotherapeutic technique has any inherent power either. It's all magical thinking in a way. It can be useful as a ritual if it's framed correctly. But if no thought has any inherent power, then it kind of goes to say that no psychotherapeutic technique has any inherent power either. So I hope this was thought provoking and useful. If you would like to work on anxiety issues with me or any other issue, you're welcome to reach out to me at provocativehypnosis.com. I also do seminars and mentoring. And as always, thanks for listening.